I'd spent 5 years making my house on Oak Street into a home. Nothing fancy, just a modest 3-bedroom with a yard big enough for my weekend gardening habit. Springfield wasn't exactly a gardener's paradise, but I'd learned which flowers could survive both the Missouri summer heat and my amateur care. The neighbors were good people, mostly retirees and young families who'd wave as they walked their dogs or pushed strollers past my yard. That all changed when Karen Mitchell moved into the blue Colonial across the street. At first, I barely noticed her. New neighbor moves in, unpacks boxes, gets settled, normal stuff. I even considered bringing over a welcome basket before I got caught up with work. By the time I thought about it again, Karen had already begun her campaign. It started with sideways glances when I was out watering my plants. Then came the not-so-subtle comments when we happened to check our mailboxes at the same time. "Those garden gnomes are certainly colorful," she said one afternoon, the word colorful sounding like a diagnosis. I just nodded and went back inside. The gnomes were gifts from my niece, hand-painted ceramic figures that made me smile. One was fishing in my small bird bath, another pushing a tiny wheelbarrow. Nothing outrageous. Within her first month, Karen had already attended her first Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association meeting. Within 2, she'd joined some committee. By month 3, neighbors were talking about Karen complaints in hushed tones at the community mailboxes. "Got a letter about my trash cans yesterday," George from 2 doors down told me. "Apparently they remained visible from the street for 18 hours instead of being moved to the backyard. She timed it." I laughed it off. HOAs could be picky, but this seemed extreme even by their standards. Then my turn came. A crisp white envelope appeared tucked into my doorframe with "Resident" written in sharp, precise letters. Inside was a typed note on pale blue stationery. "Your lawn ornaments, specifically the garden gnomes, are not in keeping with neighborhood aesthetics and are lowering the tone of Oak Street. Please remove them promptly. A concerned neighbor." No signature, but the pale blue matched Karen's front door color exactly. I crumpled the note and tossed it in my recycling bin. The gnomes stayed put. 3 days later, I stepped onto my porch to water the potted geraniums that framed my front door, except they weren't there. 2 terracotta pots, missing. I checked around the yard thinking the wind might have knocked them over, but found nothing. Weird, but not worth calling the police about. I chalked it up to teenage pranks and bought new ones the following weekend. The replacement geraniums looked even better than the originals. I added a few more pots while I was at the garden center, some purple petunias and white alyssum that cascaded nicely over the edges. 6 days later, I came home from work to find the solar pathway lights I'd installed along my front walkway had vanished. All 8 of them, gone without a trace. Now it was getting annoying. I replaced those too, this time choosing sturdier metal-staked versions that would be harder to pull out of the ground. "Kids these days," my next-door neighbor commented when I mentioned the thefts. "My son's bicycle disappeared from our driveway last summer. Never did find out who took it." I wanted to believe it was random neighborhood mischief, but the day I walked out to my car and found a deep, jagged scratch running the entire length of the driver's side door, I knew better. The scratch was too precise, too deliberate, and too high up to be accidental. That's when I remembered Karen's comment at the community mailbox a week earlier. "Those decorations of yours are an eyesore. It's a shame someone doesn't do something about them." At the time, I'd brushed it off as typical Karen grumbling. Now, running my fingers along the gouge in my car door, her words took on a more sinister meaning. The repair estimate came to $800, well above my insurance deductible. Still, I had no proof, just suspicions and circumstantial timing. I tried to avoid her after that, changing my schedule to water plants in the evenings when she seemed to be inside. That Friday, I decided to invest in a proper flower bed. The front of my house had a perfect spot beneath the bay window that got morning sun and afternoon shade. I spent hours at the garden center selecting plants with varying heights and complementary colors: coral bells, black-eyed Susans, coneflowers, and a border of bright begonias. The total, with quality soil, mulch, and decorative edging, came to just over $300. I worked all day Saturday getting everything planted and arranged just right. By sunset, I stood back admiring my handiwork, the splash of colors against the brick facade, the careful arrangement of heights, the neat layer of cedar mulch. For once, even Karen would have nothing to complain about. This was tasteful by anyone's standards. The next morning, I grabbed my coffee and headed out front to water my new garden. I nearly dropped my mug when I rounded the corner of the house. Total destruction. Every plant uprooted and tossed aside. Mulch scattered across the lawn like someone had kicked through it repeatedly. The decorative stone edging broken and displaced. A garden stake had been jammed straight down into the middle of the bed, piercing through the weed barrier into the soil below. I stood there, coffee cooling in my hand, taking in the deliberate vandalism. $300 and a full day's work destroyed overnight. As I surveyed the damage, movement across the street caught my eye. Karen stood on her porch in her robe, coffee cup in hand, watching me. When our eyes met, she smiled and gave me a friendly wave, as if we were just two neighbors enjoying a pleasant Sunday morning. I didn't wave back. I turned and walked inside, set my mug down on the kitchen counter with more force than necessary, and took several deep breaths. This wasn't just neighborly pettiness anymore. This was deliberate, malicious destruction of property. All week, I wrestled with what to do. I considered confronting Karen directly, but quickly abandoned that idea. She'd just deny everything, and without proof, it would be my word against hers. I thought about filing a police report, but again, no evidence. The cops would listen politely and do nothing. By Saturday morning, I'd made up my mind. After a quick breakfast, I drove to the Springfield Best Buy and headed straight for the security section. A young sales associate with a name tag reading Tyler asked if I needed help. I'm looking for outdoor security cameras, something that can capture clear video at night and send alerts to my phone. Tyler nodded. We've got several options. Are you thinking wired or wireless? Wireless, I replied, and I need them to be discreet. I left the store with 3 motion-activated cameras, a small trail camera, and significantly lighter pockets. The total came to just over $400, but peace of mind was worth the expense. Back home, I surveyed my yard to determine the optimal placement for maximum coverage. The first camera went inside a decorative birdhouse that I'd had for years but never actually mounted. I positioned it carefully on a tree branch with a clear view of my front yard and flower bed. The second camera I tucked into the lantern fixture beside my front door, angling it to capture anyone approaching from the street. The third, a hunting trail camera designed to be camouflaged, I secured in the bushes directly overlooking what remained of my flower garden. Once all 3 cameras were in place, I tested the system, walking through the yard and checking the feeds on my phone. Each camera triggered exactly as planned, capturing clear images and sending instant notifications. If Karen came back, I'd know about it. On Sunday, I gathered the few plants that might survive from the wreckage of my garden. Several of the hardier perennials could be salvaged, their root systems still intact despite being yanked from the soil. I carefully replanted them, adding a few new tulips to replace those that were beyond saving. I made sure to arrange everything visibly from the street, a perfect target if Karen decided to strike again. As I worked, I noticed her curtains twitch occasionally. She was watching. Good. Monday passed without incident. I half expected to wake up Tuesday morning to more destruction, but my garden remained untouched. Maybe the visible work I'd done over the weekend had satisfied her need to make me miserable for now. Or maybe she was planning something worse. I checked the camera feeds before going to bed Tuesday night, then set my phone on my nightstand with the volume up, just in case. At 12:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with multiple alerts. I grabbed it and opened the security app, heart racing. The live feed from the birdhouse camera showed a figure moving across my front lawn, a woman in what appeared to be a bathrobe. Karen. I sat up in bed, eyes glued to the screen. She walked with purpose, a pair of gardening shears glinting in her right hand as she approached my flower bed. I switched to the trail camera view for a closer angle. The night vision mode captured her in eerie green-tinted clarity as she knelt beside my newly replanted flowers. For the next 8 minutes, I watched as she methodically cut the heads off each tulip, one by one. She worked carefully, almost lovingly, as if pruning prized roses instead of destroying someone else's property. At one point, she looked up, directly into the trail camera, with a small, satisfied smile. She had no idea she was being recorded. I saved the video clips from all 3 cameras, making sure each one had clear timestamps. The birdhouse camera had caught her crossing from her house to mine. The porch camera showed her distinctive blue bathrobe, and the trail camera had captured multiple clear shots of her face in the moonlight. It was more than enough. I barely slept the rest of the night reviewing the footage again and again. By morning, I had a plan. After making coffee, I sat at my computer and selected the clearest still images from the videos. I printed them in color, along with screenshots showing the date and time stamps. Then I created a document chronologically listing every incident I could remember: the missing geraniums, the stolen pathway lights, the car scratch, the destroyed garden, and now the beheaded tulips. For each incident, I included the date, a description of what happened, and an estimate of the financial damage. I prepared 2 identical packets of evidence. Each contained printed photos, my written timeline of events, and a USB drive with all the video files, one for the police, one for the HOA. Around 10 in the morning, I drove to the Springfield Police Department. The officer at the front desk looked bored when I mentioned a neighborhood dispute, but perked up when I mentioned I had video evidence of property damage. "I'd like to file a formal complaint," I explained. "My neighbor has been vandalizing my property for weeks. Last night I caught her on camera." The officer took my information and directed me to a small room where I waited for about 20 minutes before Officer Daniel Martinez came in. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with a professional demeanor that put me at ease. "Mr. Wilson, I understand you're having issues with a neighbor." I handed him the evidence packet. "Everything's in here, Officer Martinez. Multiple incidents of vandalism and trespassing, culminating in what happened last night." He looked through the printed photos, eyebrows rising slightly. "This is from your security cameras?" "Yes, I installed them after she destroyed my entire garden last weekend." Officer Martinez nodded. "Smart move. We see a lot of neighbor disputes, but most people don't think to get evidence like this." He took my formal statement, asking clarifying questions about dates and times. When we finished, he assured me they would follow up. "We'll contact Ms. Mitchell and investigate this matter. In the meantime, continue to document any further incidents." After leaving the police station, I drove directly to Robert Johnson's house. As president of the Oakwood Heights HOA, he needed to know what was happening. Robert was a retired bank manager in his early 60s who took his HOA responsibilities very seriously. I rang his doorbell a little before noon. He answered wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, looking every bit the community leader even on a Wednesday morning. "Tom, this is unexpected. What can I do for you?" "I need to discuss an ongoing issue with a neighbor. Do you have a few minutes?" He invited me in, and we sat in his meticulously organized living room. I handed him the second evidence packet. "This contains documentation of repeated property damage and trespassing by Karen Mitchell," I explained. "Last night I caught her on camera destroying my garden. I've already filed a police report, but I wanted the HOA to be aware of the situation as well." Robert reviewed the materials with a frown. "I've received some interesting complaints from Ms. Mitchell about your property, garden gnomes and such. But this," he tapped the photos, "this is completely unacceptable behavior." "I've tried to be a good neighbor," I said. "I've ignored her notes and her comments, but she's caused hundreds of dollars in damage, and it keeps escalating." Robert nodded gravely. Leave this with me. The board will need to address this properly." He slipped the packet into a folder. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention and for being so thorough with your documentation." On the drive home, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For weeks, Karen had made me feel powerless in my own home. Now, the tables had turned. I had evidence. I had reported her to the proper authorities. Whatever happened next was out of my hands, but at least I wasn't her silent victim anymore. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Karen collecting her mail. When she saw me, her smug smile faltered. She hurried back inside without her usual wave or pointed glare. She didn't know yet what was coming, but something in my expression must have told her that our one-sided war had shifted. I walked to my flower bed and looked down at the decapitated tulips, their bright petals now scattered and wilting on the ground. I'd replace them again, of course, and maybe add a few more garden gnomes while I was at it. 3 days had passed since I'd submitted my evidence to both the police and Robert Johnson. I'd spent most of that time checking my phone for updates, wondering when or if anything would happen. The waiting felt worse than the vandalism itself. I was about to start cooking dinner when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Robert Johnson's name. "Tom, Robert here. I've called an emergency HOA meeting for this evening at 7 at the community center. I'd like you to attend." "An emergency meeting? About Karen?" "Yes, I've reviewed your evidence with the board secretary. This requires immediate attention." I turned off the stove burner. My pasta dinner would have to wait. "I'll be there." "Good. And Tom, bring your laptop with those video files. We'll need to display them." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, a mix of relief and anxiety washing over me. This was what I wanted. Official acknowledgement of Karen's behavior, but I hadn't expected things to move so quickly. The HOA typically took weeks to address even minor issues like improper mailbox colors. At 6:45, I pulled into the Oakwood Heights Community Center parking lot. Several cars were already there, including Robert's silver Volvo and, I noted with surprise, Karen's blue Prius. I grabbed my laptop bag and headed inside. The meeting room had been arranged with a long table at the front where Robert sat with 11 other board members. Karen was seated in the front row of audience chairs, her back straight and hair perfectly styled. She glanced at me when I entered, then quickly looked away. I chose a seat near the back, setting my laptop on my knees. About 20 other neighbors filled the remaining chairs. Far more than usually attended regular HOA meetings. At exactly 7:D, Robert called the meeting to order, his voice carrying the formal tone he reserved for official business. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. The board has called this emergency session to address a serious violation of our community standards and, potentially, local laws." Karen shifted in her seat, crossing her legs and recrossing them. She wore a cream-colored blouse and navy slacks, dressed for business rather than her usual casual attire. "Mr. Wilson, would you please connect your computer to the projector? We need to review the evidence you've provided." I moved to the front of the room, connected my laptop to the projector cable, and pulled up the video files. The large screen behind Robert flickered to life, showing my desktop background. "Which file should I open first?" I asked. "The overview compilation, please," Robert replied. I clicked on the file I'd prepared that morning. A single video that combined clips from all 3 cameras with timestamps clearly visible in the corner of each frame. The room darkened as Robert dimmed the lights. The video began playing. First came footage from my birdhouse camera showing Karen crossing the street in her distinctive blue bathrobe. Next, the porch camera captured her approaching my house with garden shears. Finally, the trail camera provided the clearest view of all, Karen methodically cutting the heads off my tulips, her face plainly visible in the night vision recording. A collective murmur spread through the room. I glanced at Karen. Her face had drained of color, her earlier confidence replaced by wide-eyed shock. When the video ended, Robert turned the lights back up. "Ms. Mitchell, would you care to respond to what we've just seen?" Karen stood up, smoothing her slacks. "That video is obviously fake," she said, her voice higher than usual. "Anyone can doctor footage these days. I was home in bed that night." "The timestamps show this occurred just after midnight on Tuesday," Robert noted. "All 3 camera angles captured the same event." "It wasn't me," Karen insisted. "That could be anyone in a bathrobe." From the second row, Emily Taylor cleared her throat. I recognized her from previous HOA meetings but had never spoken to her directly. "If I may," Emily said, standing up. "That's the same blue bathrobe Karen wears every morning to collect her mail. I can see her front door from my kitchen window, and she follows the same routine daily. Bathrobe, coffee cup, mail collection at approximately 8:15 a.m. Karen whipped around to face Emily. "You've been watching me." "I notice patterns," Emily replied calmly, "and that is definitely your bathrobe." Several other neighbors nodded in agreement. Robert tapped his pen on the table. "Ms. Mitchell, the evidence is quite clear. The HOA board has reviewed the timeline of events Mr. Wilson documented, along with the video evidence. This pattern of behavior constitutes clear violations of Sections 4, 7, and 12 of our community bylaws regarding property damage, trespassing, and neighborhood conduct." Karen sat back down, arms crossed tightly across her chest. "This is ridiculous. I'm being set up." Robert ignored her comment. "The board has voted unanimously to issue a formal warning and impose a fine of $750 for documented property damage. This fine must be paid within 30 days. Karen's mouth dropped open. $750? You can't be serious. The estimate for replacing the destroyed plantings comes to $652, with an additional administrative fee as permitted by our bylaws," Robert explained, his tone matter-of-fact. "You're fortunate Mr. Wilson didn't press for compensation for the previously damaged items, which would have added significantly to this amount." The remainder of the meeting passed in a blur. Robert reviewed the specific bylaw violations in detail while Karen sat rigidly in her chair. When the meeting adjourned, she was the first to leave, pushing past other neighbors without making eye contact. Several people approached me afterward, expressing sympathy about my garden and appreciation for my patience in handling the situation. It felt odd receiving support from neighbors I barely knew, but their genuine concern was touching. Robert caught me as I was packing up my laptop. "Well handled, Tom. The board appreciates your thorough documentation." "Thank you for taking it seriously," I replied. "Do you think this will actually stop her?" Robert lowered his voice. "Between the HOA fine and whatever the police decide to do, I suspect Ms. Mitchell will reconsider her actions very carefully from now on." The following afternoon, I was working from home when my doorbell rang. Officer Martinez stood on my porch, looking professional in his uniform. "Good afternoon, Mr. Wilson. I wanted to update you on your complaint against Ms. Mitchell." I invited him in, and we sat in my living room. Martinez pulled out a small notebook. "After reviewing your evidence and interviewing Ms. Mitchell, we've decided not to pursue felony charges at this time." My heart sank. "So nothing's going to happen?" Martinez held up his hand. "I didn't say that. While the dollar amount of damage doesn't meet our threshold for criminal prosecution, we've issued Ms. Mitchell a formal trespass notice. She's been officially warned that entering your property again without permission will result in immediate charges." "Does that actually do anything?" I asked. "It establishes a legal record," Martinez explained. "If she violates the notice, we can arrest her immediately. And most people take official warning seriously. Based on my conversation with her, I believe she understands the consequences now." After Officer Martinez left, I stood on my porch looking at my yard. The beheaded tulips still made me angry, but knowing that Karen had faced consequences from both the HOA and police provided a certain satisfaction. Over the next few weeks, Karen's behavior changed dramatically. The first time I saw her after the meeting, she was walking on the opposite side of the street. When she spotted me in my front yard, she quickened her pace and kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. I noticed she'd begun parking her car 3 houses down rather than in front of her home. A longer walk, but one that allowed her to avoid passing my property. Whenever our paths nearly crossed, she would abruptly cross the street or turn around. Robert mentioned that Karen had stopped attending HOA meetings and had withdrawn from her committee positions. Her rigid smile and community patrol had disappeared. She was still living across the street, but it was as if she'd tried to make herself invisible. With spring arriving in full force, I doubled down on my gardening efforts. I replaced all the damaged plants and added more. A row of cheerful yellow daffodils now lined my walkway. Purple coneflowers and bright red salvias created a vibrant border around my front yard. I installed a small, bubbling fountain near the edge of my lawn, something Karen had specifically mentioned as tacky in one of her anonymous notes. And the gnomes? I added 3 more to my collection, positioning them prominently around the yard. One rode a miniature bicycle near the mailbox. Another held a tiny fishing pole beside the new fountain. The third, my personal favorite, sat on a mushroom with a sign reading, "All are welcome here." What surprised me most was how the neighborhood responded. George, who had received Karen's 18-hour trash can citation, added his own garden gnome collection that rivaled mine in size and whimsy. Emily planted a rainbow of tulips along her driveway. The Petersons installed a decorative windmill that spun merrily in the breeze, something Karen had vocally disapproved of at an HOA meeting months earlier. It wasn't coordinated, as far as I knew. No one explicitly mentioned solidarity. But one by one, small decorative touches appeared throughout Oakwood Heights, as if neighbors were collectively reclaiming their right to express themselves through their homes and gardens. By the time summer arrived, my property had become the most vibrantly colorful on the block. The garden that Karen had tried so hard to destroy now flourished with more life and personality than ever before. My security cameras remained in place, but they had captured nothing more threatening than a neighborhood cat curiously batting at my garden gnomes.